So like most comic books during this period, the cover, which of course was drawn by Adams, doesn't actually depict anything that happens in the story, but is instead an amalgamation of key elements of the story. In this case, we have the beautiful Senora carrying a torch, flanked by a trained falcon and two wolves, with the threat of death menacing the Batman. So right away, the look and the tone is a vast difference from the two Bat books that were published in the prior month. This artwork is just amazing. The storytelling is amazing. We have a Dutch tilt on the opening panel as the shadow of Batman is cast over the two empty graves. I do have to question, though, where's this light source that's casting the shadow? Because we have the full moon in the background, and Batman is facing the full moon, so it can't be the moon that's casting the shadow. It's effective, but if you stop and think about it, where's that shadow being cast? I don't know. It kind of bugs me. On the opening panel, we have the old school Batman logo, and this is a really old school Batman logo, and it's incorporated into the opening narration, and it really stands out because it doesn't fit the art style anymore. It doesn't fit the tone. This Batman logo will soon be changed. Reading the narration, the exposition boxes, normally they would just be, kind of setting up as Batman, drives across Gotham City, and meanwhile, and all that. Denny O'Neil writes the narration as prose. It's like he's writing a novel. He's not just expositing, he's actually writing a novel, and you cannot help but get drawn in by the writing. The panel layout is very simple, yet very effective in telling the story. There are a lot of nice low angles, bird's eye view, worm's eye view, Dutch tilts. We have a nice low angle of the balloons as they're being launched. And the next panel, we have a low angle shot looking at Valdez from below as he's looking in terror as these falcons are about to attack. The expressions, the very expressive face, not cartoonish at all, but very expressive and Neal Adams was an illustrator. He wasn't a cartoonist. He wasn't a comic book artist. He was an illustrator, and he brought that illustrative sensibility to comic books, and he was the start of it all. And every Batman comic book artist afterwards, I think, drew not literally, but they drew inspiration from Neal Adams. We have this panel, the third panel on page 3, which I think is really beautiful. We have Batman rising from the water. He's hunched over. The water's just pouring from his shoulders and from his head, and as he's pulling Valdez from the river. The muscles in his shoulders, the way the cape is draping across his body. Very beautiful panel there. This, of course, may be the first stealth exit of Batman, where they turn around and he's gone. He's nowhere to be seen. That would really become a trope later on in the modern era, and especially during the 1990s animated series. Page 5, we have Batman leaping at the sharpshooters. He has he's thinking to himself as he's leaping in, "As I hoped, my startling appearance is spooking them." That bit of dialogue I don't think is really necessary. I think they could have left that out, and we would have gotten that idea, because they're again, they're very expressive. The way Adams drawing them as they're turning around and they're like in amazement of this bat-shaped creature leaping at them. They're in Mexico. They probably have never heard of the Batman because there's no internet back then. We have another panel on page 6 where we have a really nice overhead shot of the two vicious wolves. It's like they positioned the camera on the treetops just over the two wolves who are overlooking Batman. So we have like these layers. We have these different planes that are with Batman lying on the ground and the wolves looking up from above, and we're looking up above them. So nice layout, nice composition. I do think that a lot of the character dialogue is a bit too much exposition. The bit where Batman's hanging from the rope, listening in on the Muertos, leading Valdez in. He thinks to himself, how fortunate it was for him to have that rope hanging out the bottom of the cliff. Again, this sounds like, kind of Adam West dialogue. Look, we let, Captain Ahab, put these fishnets here on the side of the building in case, the Catwoman tossed the canary cage out the window. So it's, we're still working from storytelling in the late 1960s into the 1970s. So, visually we're taking some giant leaps. Story writing, Neal is very flowery with his, no pun intended, very flowery with his prose, but there are still some sort of exposition type of clunky dialogue that we're probably still going to have to deal with as we go through these issues. I have to tell you, when we have the Senora giving a karate chop to Valdez and the Senora punching Batman, you really feel the force of those blows. Juan is using his whole body to basically just slug Batman, who is under the influence of these flowers. And just you really feel the force of these issues and the onomatopoeia. Actually, something really interesting, which I'll get into in a second. But the onomatopoeia is very bold and it takes up like almost half of the panel there. It helps to convey the full force of these blows that these characters are taking. Whereas you might get like the sort of like the little, socks and pows and zaps and everything. And just sort of, they're more posed characters beforehand. But yeah, you can just, the weight, that the body, how his body is shifting his weight as he's, punching Batman into submission. Again, lots of great expressions. We have a close-up of Batman writhing in pain as he's about to experience the nightmare, and how he's sort of hunched over, and these, just the weird visions that he's seeing. You can break down the composition of each panel. It's done very, very well. I don't like the cruelty to animals, because we have Batman kicking one falcon, and he takes the other falcon, he traps him into his cape, and he basically like smashes the falcon into the wall. So yeah, I guess it had to be done, but yeah, that was really cruel. And again, the body language with Batman throwing the torch. You can just feel the movement. You can feel the weights being shifted from one leg to the other. The follow through, the back and the arm arch. Artists who are beginning, they work and work and work and work to have it flow that smoothly and not to be stiff and not be posed. It takes a lot of work. I mean, trust me, I've been trying to draw this stuff for years. It's not that easy. You have to just sort of let yourself go and not think about it. But also you have to be very hyper aware of the anatomy of the body. This is nothing that had really ever been seen before outside of Neal Adams' earlier work with Batman and Brave and Bold. So the transformation sequence near the end, where the Muertos are running and rapidly aging, very frightening, very creepy, very effective. I mean, I remember, this was one story that was reprinted. I used to have that book, Batman from the 30s to the 70s. And I believe this was one of the stories that was reprinted. It was in black and white. But I remember this sequence and really getting creeped out by it. But looking back on it now, the whole setup of them running to and then falling into their open graves as they die is very far-fetched. They just happened to run right to that spot, and then they just happened to die right there, and they both fell into the right holes. Hopefully, because we have Dolores on the left and Juan on the right, and he was preceding her, so they both fell into the respective graves. So that's a little bit, it's sort of it nicely ties up the end of the story, but it's a bit far fetched. And then Batman. How does he engrave the death dates on the tombstones with his finger? He's not Superman, for crying out loud. I mean, does he get like the bat etching, tool from his utility belt, and he just, puts it on his finger, and he's able to scratch out 1969 on both tombstones there? He's not going to bother to wait for the keeper of the graveyard to do his job. He's just going to do it for him there. Although the image of Batman standing by the graves, of course, you cannot help but think of the tragedy of Bruce Wayne's parents being murdered. This is an image that we would see a lot in the modern era when I started reading Batman comics again back in the 80s and into the 90s. In the 90s animated series, you would often see images of Batman standing at the site of his parents' graves. So I couldn't help but be reminded of that. So what's interesting is that when reviewing this issue, I have a PDF copy of an original copy of this issue. I also have a copy of the book Batman Illustrated by Neal Adams, Volume 2, where this story is reprinted. And it's interesting to compare the versions because for these Illustrated by Neal Adams books, Adams must have had all of his original artwork. And he basically re-inked all of the art and had these recolored digitally for these reprint books. And it's really interesting to compare and contrast. In the original versions, all of the scenes of Batman fighting in the dark were done in monochrome. In the reprint, they're much more colorful. We have, the varying shades of blue and gray in Batman's costume. We have the outlines of white, where the light source is hitting Batman. The original has a lot of browns and warmer tones to give the sense of the setting of the story, which is Mexico. While the reprint is more blue and gray, and it's in much colder tones that are being used, that really helps set the mood of the story. And the onomatopoeia, the fight sounds, he redid all of those onomatopoeias. They're much bolder, they're much bigger in the reprint. They're much more effective. I mean, they were pretty effective in the original. Interestingly enough, Neal Adams took the opportunity to sort of rearrange panels and page layouts for the reprint. Page 10 of the original had 3 panels and an advertisement taking up the bottom third of the page. And so what Adams did for the reprint was that he took the first panel of page 11, where Batman is being led to the bed of flowers, and he replaced the advertisement with that panel. And then page 11, the original page 11 had 4 panels. So he took away the first panel. So he had 3 panels on the reprint of page 11. And it's even more dynamic because we have, panel 1 is now the close-up of Batman writhing in pain. Panel 2 is Batman hallucinating all these dragons, these pink dragons flying in the air. And panel 3 is Juan laying in Batman with that punch. And it's a much more effective layout. And there are bits of panel in the reprint that you don't see in the original because he had to fill the space up because he moved one panel off the page. So Adams must have had the original artwork in order to, or maybe he just sort of redrew, the bits that were missing. But he made a much more effective page layout on the reprint because we had to cover that space where the advertisement was. It was really kind of weird how they'd sort of like a page of a Sunday comic strip where we would have sort of half page advertisements or like a quarter page or a third of a page that was taking up for an advertisement because I guess they sold so much advertisement they had to place it somewhere. So I'm sure there was a lot of sort of monkeying around with panel layouts in order to accommodate the advertisements. I do remember when a few years ago when I purchased these illustrated books by Neal Adams, I was a bit disappointed that all the art was re-inked and colored digitally because I wanted to remember, because I do remember some of these comic books, getting hold of some of these early 70s comic books and how they were the process of printing color, where you only have red and blue and yellow and black, and you had to have a combination of those three primary colors in order to come up with your secondary colors. How like the flesh tones would be basically these little red dots that if you far away enough it looks flesh colored. The greens would be a series of blue and yellow dots that would make up the green. But with digital coloring now, you can do any color you like, and it would be solid. And you can make it more three-dimensional with the different degrees of colors. So I was a bit disappointed that the art was re-inked and colored digitally for all these old Batman stories. But I think for this story, I think the reprint job, it really improves the story a great deal for me. I mean, the original inking and coloring was well done, and it just was a very dramatic story back then, but it's even more effective now if you got a hold of the illustration by Neal Adams books. So how has the story dated, and how does it still hold up for modern readers? Well, I mean, Bruce Wayne's tuxedo is kind of really dated. He's got the roughly the ruffles on the front of the shirt and the collars. So that kind of dates it. But otherwise, this story is timeless. It's as timeless as the villains of the story. Denny O'Neil is really unconcerned about the current continuity because there's nothing about VIP, no mention of it at all in this issue. Batman is like slam bang him into Mexico. He's in Mexico. We don't know why. We don't know. We never see him arrive there. He's not thinking about what's going on in Gotham City. He's just in Mexico, and he's there to solve this mystery of this weird couple. And Neal Adams' art is just much more expressive and dynamic than anything that came before. And this one issue just instantly defined the look of Batman for my generation and for all the generations to come. This look of Batman still carries on to this day.